if each of you would make a closing 3-minute statement summarizing anything that you feel is important to close with. Okay, anyone could start wherever you want.
I would just say that you know, these issues can be massive and seem like they're untouchable, but the good news is that each of us every day makes choices about what's on our plate, and those choices can have profound impacts on our own health, on the earth, and on other animals. And you know, the best thing to do is to go vegan, to eat no animal products at all. For those of you who are not vegan, start slowly and go as quickly as you can. But you can be empowered to take steps, you know, as opposed to looking at it and saying, oh, it's hopeless, because it can feel that way sometimes. Look at what you can do, start, and then continue. So look at what you can do and embrace it and start taking steps.
All right, I'll go. So I've been working on a concept with some other social justice activists, so it's not really fully out there yet, but I'm going to go ahead and run it by you, and maybe you have some thoughts and we can discuss it later. But it's the concept of a vegan ally. And so whether you're vegan or not vegan, there are things that you can do to support veganism if you believe in the value system. And so if you believe what veganism is about, but you're just not there yet for whatever reason, because it can be difficult. There's a lot of emotion tied to it. There's a lot of social pressures around it. And so whatever the reasons are, but if you say, yeah, I get it. So for example, I get public transportation and why that's so important, but I still drive more than I would like. As much as I just said I would get rid of vegan tiramisu, I am a chocoholic. I would like to not eat so much chocolate, but I still do because I haven't worked through that. So my ideal and my actions are not aligned. And so what I would like to encourage people to do is to be sure that you don't shift your values and ideals to match your actions, to sit in that discomfort a little bit and let that be okay, and just acknowledge, you know what, it would be better if I didn't eat processed foods or if I ate more vegan foods. This cheese is not great. It is causing greenhouse gases. I'm still eating it because cheese is actually fairly addictive. It's the hardest to quit in going vegan. Somebody said bacon's the hardest. It's not. It's cheese. But so yeah, obviously they were not vegan. It's cheese. But so even if your actions aren't matching up, just know that you can do things like, first off, be friendly to vegans. Don't be defensive. We actually have to deal with that quite a bit. Like it can, you know, it's something that we can have to just deal with the stress socially of people being defensive around us, even if we are being nice. So have vegan options available. Buy vegan options sometimes, just increasing consumer demand. Even if you're not vegan, the more vegan products being bought, it helps other people. It creates a social structure that's sympathetic towards it and that's friendly towards it, and it creates actual demand that will reduce prices and bring in tipping points and things of that nature. So even if you're not vegan, there's lots of things you can do to support that. And again, just to go ahead and be brave and be in the discomfort of, I'm not there yet, but I do agree with it and I want to help in my way. So I would never vote against public transportation. You know, I'm in favor of public transportation even if I'm not there yet. So the same kind of thing is not to bring your values to match your actions. Try to let your values pull up your actions, and even if it's imperfect, to work through that. Now, I'm going to say something that might seem a little contradictory. So we talked about not saying, David didn't want to say meat was bad. I think something to that nature. I will say it's bad. Meat is bad. Killing animals is bad. But the people aren't. It's not that the people are bad, but it's a bad system. And in Circles of Compassion, Will Tuttle's anthology, I have an essay called Hunger, Meat, and the Banality of Evil. And again, it's not that the people are evil, but there's a normalization of atrocities. And it's not my concept, it's Hannah Arendt's concept that I'm applying. And it's Hunger, Meat, and the Banality of Evil in Circles of Compassion. And I'm just so grateful to be here. This has been a wonderful panel. And again, thank you all, and thank you. Next.
Earlier this year, I posted something on my website. I think it's about climate change. And I've spoken quite a bit about climate change here today and in my presentation yesterday. But I wrote something that I concluded to myself that I thought was the best thing I ever wrote. And I tried to make it read like a scientific paper, sort of, and I kind of started it off with credits to Robert Goodland and Jeff Anhang, who I'd mentioned earlier. Jeff was his co-researcher at the World Bank. I never met Robert in person, but I did attend his memorial service in Washington in the spring of 2014, where I met Jeff Anhang and have corresponded with him quite a bit. But I credit both of those guys with my getting kind of on the climate change bandwagon. So yesterday in my presentation, I posted and ran a 3-minute silent movie of a pump handle graph, and I wanted to share that with you, just to tell you how to find it. If you go to my website, which is HPJMH, 5 letters, HPJMH.com, and right at the top of that website, you'll see all of my slides that I used yesterday, and then you'll see the movie, and you got to carefully look at that thing, but it's called the Pump Handle 2014. It's a graph by NOAA, and it's just amazing, and it helps people that are maybe climate change deniers or people that want to explain climate change, but it's totally data driven, and it's 3 minutes and a half or so. And right below that is a link to my 12-point paper on climate change that I posted here on April 23rd. So I think that's what I want to leave you with. I think climate change is the #1 issue. I think the #1 thing we have to do is figure out a way to get the world to shift to a whole food, plant-based diet, and do that as quickly as possible. So that's my thoughts. Thanks for including me on this panel.
I guess I would just end with a point that I'd stressed before. I think it's really important to figure out ways of communicating these issues with people who are concerned, obviously with animal suffering and well-being, people who are concerned about climate change, the loss of biodiversity, but people also who are broadly engaged in social struggles, social justice, and communicating why this is such a momentous issue. And I think it's important to try and embed issues surrounding industrial livestock and dietary change in very broad-ranging, as a central part of broad-ranging struggles for a more equitable, sustainable, and humane world. And so I think where do we begin is a huge question. There's so many challenges that for so many people that's just an unconscious part of everyday life. Donna mentioned this banality of evil. I talk about it as the violence of everyday life. The suffering that we are, or people on this panel, but many people are just so intimately connected to animal lives in many ways, consuming the bodies of animals who've suffered intensely, and yet so distant from those animals in their consciousness. And I think it's a really hard thing to break down some of that unconsciousness. There's a case that's unfolding right now in my neck of the woods in Ontario that's got a fair bit of international attention. I don't know if it's received much in the United States, but it's a woman who is giving water to some pigs on the way to a slaughterhouse. And Canada has horrible farm transport welfare laws, and it began as a movement about 5 years ago of these pigs coming to slaughter in this packed into a truck and suffering of dehydration and intense heat after a long transport to increasingly centralized slaughter, so they're moving over further distances. And so she and others began a movement of giving water to these pigs as a bearing witness to the suffering and a bearing witness to this kind of invisibility in our world. And the movement grew. There are some groups in the U.S., there are some groups in the U.K., and the Pig Save movement has grown within Canada. And last year she got charged for basically criminal trespass. The charge is trespass, and they're trying to shut her up by intimidating her. Criminal trespass. And what is the basis of the criminal trespass charge? It's damage to property, and that property, the alleged damage is the property to the pigs, even though the pigs were still slaughtered. And so it's something that's unfolding right now, and I just raised that as an example of a really dedicated, passionate person who's trying to prick that unconsciousness in a really, I think, a very powerful kind of act of civil disobedience. And the trial's unfolding. You can follow it in the news. It's got, as I said, I don't know if it's in the U.S. news media, but it's been in the British news media, and Canada's got a fair bit of coverage to it. But I think it speaks to the challenge of how do we burst the unconscious that surrounds us, everyday violence or the banality of evil. And I think part of that challenge rests with building bridges to people who are broadly concerned about environment, climate, biodiversity, and social justice as well. Oh, and there's a big Facebook movement around it, I guess. Yeah. Not a Facebook person. Check pig, if you do research on Pig Save, or just type in Pig Save, and the name's Anita that's on the trial.
Well, congratulations, everyone. I think I'd like to just summarize by saying that once again, thank you for this opportunity. I think that's the most important thing is education and enlightenment, and to gather as many people as possible in the movement towards, especially with the topic that I'm most involved with sustainability in our environment. I'm going to say we need to, I'm going to conclude by saying that we need to begin with the precept that, understanding the precept that we're in a state of unsustainability. And there's no greater issue that faces us than that of our connection to our environment. And as I said before, in summary, that it's very important to take control of your own life and seek those measures that make you and your family and those around you more healthier as an individual. But it won't matter how healthy you are if our planet isn't healthy. And I think that we also need to keep in mind the interconnection that we have with all other species on Earth that we share this planet with, and our future generations. And we happen to be in a very unique situation, or a very unique position in the history of mankind, or womankind, or humankind. And that is that we're at a crossroads where the generations living today that are in somewhat of a leadership position can make or break humanity. And that's not a gross overstatement. It happens to be the reality of things. And so I think that it's inherent upon all of us then to continue seeking as much information as possible, become educated as much as possible, seek the right definitions of what sustainability and environment, and in terms of food choice and the connection to our environment, seek out as much as you can about, become educated as much as you can, and then be an advocate. Every 5 years, the U.S. dietary guidelines, for instance, are positioned or stated. And this year happened to be the first time, or actually last year, when the advisory committee, it was the first time the advisory committee had stated that the environment should be positioned somewhere in the dietary guidelines, which undermined, of course, the meat and dairy and fishing industries. So this is one of those issues that even though the advisory committee promoted the inclusion of reducing, if not eliminating, meat, dairy, and fish, it never got. It was never printed, and so, but it's the beginning, it's the first step. So I think that that's a good example of where we need to go with policy making. I think educate yourself, educate those around you, and do what you can to understand this nexus of the environment and food choice and sustainability and the connectedness that we have to all other species, as I said, and also, even though, again, climate change is the most, has the most notoriety, it's only one of many of the tipping points that face us, and many of the tipping points will happen irrespective of climate change. So understand that and appreciate that you can all do something about this, because the thread that weaves its way through all these areas of unsustainability, it can be found in your plates. And the quicker you can reduce and eliminate animal agriculture from those products that end up on your plate, the easier we'll and the more quickly we'll find our ways on a state of towards a path of sustainability. You'll do it for yourselves, you'll do it for those around you, and you'll do it for all inhabitants on Earth. So thank you for being part of this tremendous event, and by being here, you are already on the right path. So congratulations and welcome aboard.
Just going to quickly end with a little bit of devil's advocacy here that may not surprise you. And really it's more questions than statements, but you know, agriculture has been with us for I think around 10,000 years or more since we became civilized. That's both crops and animal agriculture. I think it is part of who we are. It's part of what has made us what we are. So I'm just wondering a world without any animal agriculture whatsoever and how that might work. And for example, then I suppose, and I'm not saying this is a good or bad thing, these are just sort of questions. If we were all to stop eating animal products immediately tomorrow, I guess domestic pigs, chickens, and cows would go extinct, right? Unless we kept a few around in zoos, just to remember.
There could be like wild, you know, populations, but the mass-produced ones would, the only reason they exist is because we mass-produce them. They can't even reproduce naturally sometimes. So,
right.
So certain species, yes, probably would.
Okay.
And it would also, it would, if we were really going to do it, it would happen gradually. Hopefully it would happen gradually, quickly, but we just stopped producing, them, and then sanctuaries, not zoos.
Sanctuaries, yes,
Yeah.
thank you. I'm all for sanctuaries.
It's also important to remember, for most of the history of agriculture, there's been a few 100 million people on Earth, not 7 billion going on 9 to 10 billion.
No, absolutely,
Yeah.
I know. And I'm just, again, I'm just raising some contentious points.
Sorry. Let me help. I guess I'm going to real quickly expound just slightly on what Tony just said. Dave, are you familiar with the island of Tikopia, or some of the other Tikopia? Yeah, no. Okay. All right. So very quickly, and without going into a lot of detail, it's an enclosed environment, sustainability, and of sustainability, similar to what the model that I provided or discussed with Hawaii. So about in the year 1400, 1500, and I apologize if it's not an exact year, but they decided they were raising pigs. And they had maybe 8 kings at the time. You were talking about dictators. They had 8 dictators at the time. And they realized that their little subsistence fishing could continue in the reef systems because at that time they weren't inundated with ships from, trawling ships from China and Japan in their waters. But they also realized that pigs, domesticated pigs, and their animal agriculture essentially on their island was not sustainable. So whereas there are some other civilizations throughout history that we don't have to go into right now that didn't survive, they didn't make it because one reason or another, there are many of them that had a sustainability issue. They stripped away their environment at a quicker rate than what could sustain them. Well, Tikopia made the decision to do away with all of their pigs. I don't know if exactly, I wasn't there in 1400, but if they had one big roast, or they let them all live until they died naturally. The point to that is that they realized that they had an enclosed earth on their island, and they had an overpopulation. They had to do something about their food systems because their agricultural systems were not sustainable. So they made the right decisions, and they still have a human population today because of that. So anyway, just a quick example of it's difficult to project exactly what would happen, but we know what we should do, and so I think it's what steps have to take place to make that happen, rather than saying it doesn't make sense to do away with all the domesticated animals all at once. I think it's a matter of just taking the steps to do what's correct, and things will play out.
October 13th, 1994, New York Times. A 2-year project to decommission the $5.5 billion Shoreham nuclear power plant is finished, and all radioactive material has been removed. Richard M. Kessel, the chairman of the Long Island Power Authority, said today. Construction of Shoreham began in 1973. The plant was nearly completed by 1984, but public opposition to its opening and a lengthy dispute between the company and estate and Suffolk County officials over emergency evacuation plans delayed the issuance of a federal operating until April 1989. The project, the first in the nation to dismantle a licensed commercial nuclear reactor, cost several $1 million, less than the $186 million projected. So how many tens of thousands of people did they get to march to fight this, to dismantle this? 10, 20, 100,000 people. How many people did they have to get to be the first in the nation to dismantle a licensed commercial nuclear reactor? It was 6 people. 6 people were fighting it, protesting it, and yes, there were people that joined them to protest, but it was basically a group of 6 people that brought it down. I hope that through this conference, in this audience, and the people watching around the world, whoever you are, that you know that you don't need to be everyone. You have the power, you and 5 other people, hear this message, do what you can, use all your resources, don't assume someone else is handling this or heard this or is responsible. Don't assume someone's smarter or more scientific. You have more than enough information. We're counting on you to somehow take this from here and move it forward. Thank you for coming.